religion in and of itself is inherently totalitarian because it's saying these are the most important values and you can't question them. They're to be accepted as dogma on faith.
Here recently, John Doyle uploaded a video explicitly attacking capitalism and individualism. My colleague and I sat with a communications expert known as Don Watkins to see if there was any validity to what John Doyle was saying. Stay tuned.
First place? Well, because as the ANCAP will happily tell you, businesses have an incentive to maximize market share and profits, all that good stuff. And the logical consequence of a corporation gaining enough wealth and market share to where it's more powerful than the state is simply for it to weaponize the state by buying it so as to maintain that position of wealth and power. This is exactly what's happening now. So what's the solution? Well, just go back to the free market so it can happen again. Like, how are you even going to do that in the first place when now the elites own your government? You're not.
Well, it's actually the complete opposite. It's when the government interferes with capitalism and starts controlling who can start a business, what kind of businesses can get started, when it starts subsidizing favored businesses. Well, then there's a really good, and then there's a really powerful incentive to use your money to, quote, buy the government and buy influence from the government. But the problem is that that's not what capitalism is. Capitalism is when the government defines rights, it defines your freedom and says, like, don't commit crimes. And here's what property rights are. And then you are able to go out there and achieve something. And at that point, to the extent that the government actually maintains that functioning is just protecting people's rights from being violated by the initiation of physical force, then there's nothing to buy. And it was only the fact that even in the freest eras, government always engaged in this kind of control of business that always left the road open and incentivized people to try to buy influence. That it's precisely because capitalism was not respected that whole phenomenon gets off the ground. It's just not historically or logically true that capitalism unleashes this kind of attempt to, quote, buy the government.
Aren't you just changing definitions? Your definition just tries to, magically fix everything. And you're trying to paint some utopia by just changing the definition of the word capitalism, ignoring what people are actually talking about.
Well, it's actually this guy who's really engaging in a definition switch, which is the idea of power. Well, what kind of power are we talking about? Because there's two kinds of power that are radically at odds. So one is the power of production, economic power. And that is the idea that, like, well, hey, I have wealth. I can do more things than I could if I had less wealth. And they're conflating that with the power of the gun. Political power, the power to use physical force to dictate what others do. So no matter how much economic power you have in a free society, all you can do is offer other people rewards. Hey, work with me, buy from me, let me advertise with you. You can offer people opportunities and they're free to go their own way. And what political power under capitalism is used for, it's only to stop people who engage in the initiation of physical force, to stop criminals, to stop foreign threats, to enforce contracts. And what the critics are doing is saying, no, I want a system where political power is used for whatever I want it to be used for. And that's the real threat. That's the thing that actually takes away our freedom and controls us. But that's the complete opposite of capitalism.
But the truth is that there's no such thing as the individual, which is a liberal idea, by the way. But that doesn't mean that you don't have individual rights. Of course you do. And that doesn't mean that you can't live your life as you please. Of course you can. But from the moment that you are born, you are defined not as an individual, but as a son or as a daughter, and then maybe a brother or a sister, an American, a mentor, whatever. At no point do you ever exist as an individual. No man is an island. You're really not that special because you rely on other people and people rely on you. And it's that interdependence and cohesion upheld through a common culture that is the foundation of a prosperous and flourishing society.
I mean, this is a complete straw man. To be an individual, it's basically you would have to be God. You would have to come out with no parents, have no relationships, no interaction with other human beings. Then you're an individual. And since that doesn't exist, no, you're just a piece of the collective. But that is you can't define a term in terms of some phony, non-existent reality. Individualism is the idea that each person is an end in him or herself. That means that your life belongs to you. You have the right to enjoy it. And it has both a metaphysical and moral component. So the metaphysical component is that to be alive is to be an individual creature that has control over your faculties. And for a human being, that means primarily control over your own mind. That is, to be an individual, individualism is rooted in the fact that to understand things, to set goals, to set values, to achieve knowledge. All of that has to be is the work of an individual choosing to use his mind, make choices about how to live his or her own life. And clearly that's something we do by ourselves and can only do by ourselves. And then morally, it's the idea of, yeah, we have relationships, but what is the nature of those relationships? Is it that the group owns me and it gets to use me however it chooses? Is it the idea that basically sometimes I'm a resource to be exploited by the group and sometimes I get to do the exploiting? Or is it that, no, we're each individuals, we're each an end in ourself, and we deal with each other through voluntary choice to mutual benefit? Anybody who's denying individualism, what they're trying to do is say, like, no, I want to run other people's lives and I want to exploit other people's effort. And that is, I mean, that is the kind of slavery embodied by the ideal of collectivism.
So I think that kind of understanding of individualism is, untrue. Like, the idea that you take actions to serve yourself doesn't exist, like in a family, for instance. Like, you have a duty to, take care of your sister or your brother, or you might have to take out the trash and wash dishes and so on and so forth. So it's not that you're taking actions as a means to yourself, it's that you're taking actions as means to someone else's end.
What will often be equated is like family and collectivism. And then the idea is just, well, all of society is just an extended family. But that's BS. Collectivism is that we're going to use physical force to sacrifice the individual to the group. A family is a collection of individuals. And when individuals are bound by relationships where they value each other, then there's a kind of reciprocity that goes into maintaining our existence as members of a family. Now, it's complicated when you talk about kids because they're not fully developed adults. They can't decide on what kind of relationships they want to enter into yet. They're kind of under, it's the parent's job to be making a lot of those decisions for them, certainly early on. And so that's not really the model of human relationships. If you're thinking about like, how should we think about relationships with adults in society? You don't start with what's the relationship between parents and kids, but to compare that to individuals coming together voluntarily in a relationship where they value each other to this is the relationship between me and 50 strangers on the street. That is basically the critics of individualism are switching contexts in order to sell us on a real travesty of human relationships.
Now, that being said, there's no such thing as the collective either. It's been tried before, it fails every time because it defies the natural proclivities of human nature. My point is that there's actually a balance between individualism and collectivism that is necessary to live in a stable, free society. Because if you only focus on individualism like we've been doing for the last 100 years, then there's nothing left to unify people in the society. There's no language, there's no culture, no religion, no shared value framework. The only thing that we have in common is that we have nothing in common, but it's okay because we're all individuals.
It seems to me right here that John Doyle's point is not that we're using collectivism to sacrifice people to a bigger group. It's essentially that we need a collectivism as some type of, social fabric to hold everyone together, because if we don't, then we have, independent interest groups, popping up like BLM and stuff like that and causing all these riots. So we need some type of common ground to hold us all together. And that seems what John Doyle means by collectivism.
Anytime somebody says we need a balance in moral issues, it means they haven't defined the alternatives right. And yeah, if you have a complete straw man that says individualism means living on an island and having no relationship to other people, and collectivism is you have relationships with other people, like I guess you need some sort of a balance. But if it's individualism is that each person is pursuing their own life and happiness and relating to others on voluntary terms, then what is a balance for that? A balance is compelling people to act against their own judgment, against their own happiness, against their own lives. What's the balance between those two things? It's true that a nation has to have unity, and the United States is the perfect picture of what a rational kind of unity among individuals is. That is, it's a shared belief in the rights of the individual. It's the shared belief that you have a right to live for the sake of your own happiness, and I have the right to live for the sake of my own happiness. And that will come together when our interests intersect, when we can build mutually fulfilling relationships together. And that's something that individualists do all the time, because guess what? Living in society is a huge benefit to an individual. We benefit in terms of the knowledge available to us, and we benefit in terms of trade, and certainly we benefit in terms of the personal relationships that we can build with people. But the precondition for that, the precondition for all of those to be positive and beneficial, is precisely that we only enter into the kind of relationships that we judge as good for our lives. And so anybody who's saying, well, we need to balance individualism against collectivism, what they really mean is that I'm going to tell you what to do with your life whenever I feel like it.
I don't think that, the only times in which two individuals intersect paths is when they're trading, values and getting a job and stuff like that. I think that we should always remain connected somehow through common values such as, religion and family. We shouldn't just interconnect because, a job opportunity. We should connect all the time and maintain that social fabric of, religious values and family values.
Those things I think are not values. Certainly if we're talking about religious so-called values. And so the idea that these should predominate and these should be the basis of society. I mean, first of all, they undermine freedom. Religion by its very nature is antithetical to the kind of primary roots of freedom, which is a belief in the power of reason and a belief in the sanctity of the individual. What they're really saying is, we're going to decide which religion or which religions are worthy, and we're going to impose that on all of society. And if you don't like it, too bad.
Do you think religions are committed to imposing themselves? It almost seems like you just said all or most religions are committed to imposing themselves.
You have to keep in mind that what most of us know in our day-to-day lives as religion is neutered religion. It was neutered by the Enlightenment, and religion basically had to make terms with Enlightenment values of valuing life on earth, valuing the human mind. And so most religious people, and the way that religion is in the culture today, it's not necessarily of the same sort of crusading totalitarian form that we see in, for instance, many parts of Islam today. Religion in and of itself is inherently totalitarian, because it's saying these are the most important values and you can't question them. They're to be accepted as dogma on faith. The laws of God are to be obeyed. And if that's your outlook, then there's no rational, or there's no kind of logical opposition to enforcing them. And that's why historically, when religion has set the terms and secular life had to bow to it, then it was always anti-freedom and antithetical to people's ability to live their own lives on earth.
It seems like you're being ahistorical here, because it is American values such as family and religious type of practices that has kept America together and stuff like that. And as we see that America progressed away from those values, we can see things like BLM and all these riots going on, and it's separating America. So are you saying that you're against American values that's held America together for a very long time?
What's ahistoric is the idea that this 1950s saccharine, family, this and that was the American values. Go actually read stuff from the period of the founding. It was an enthusiasm about, they were not talking about these mealy mouth, let's all sit down to dinner and do it. That is so far from what interested them. They were concerned with the kind of individuals like Newton, who were discovering new knowledge, and people like Benjamin Franklin, who were pushing the frontiers of science forward. They were concerned with individuals actually going out there and accomplishing something. And it was the real value was on that. It was on the mind, and it was on how do we create a society where people can use their mind and live lives that are filled with achievement and joy. If you think about our problems today, it's precisely, I think, the extent to which we've abandoned that focus on the individual human mind and what it can achieve and an individual's ability to thrive and prosper, that we've gotten these problems. Because what is the kind of cancel culture debates and BLM and all of this, except for people ganging up into little tribes and fighting each other instead of viewing others as individuals? It's the American values of the founding, not the kind of American values of the Eisenhower era, which somehow get glorified because I can remember my great grandfather seemed pretty happy or something like that.
If you enjoyed this episode of Method and Madness, go ahead and make sure to click the bell icon down below so you don't miss an episode every single Monday. Additionally, if you like the content that Ayn Rand Center UK provides, then you should consider becoming a member by clicking the link in the description down below.